All right. We got to settle this once and for all. I mean, I know this is not going to stop the whole slander campaign against the great late Tupac Shakur, but maybe I can add some perspective for people who maybe didn't know this information and are willing to at least be a little bit more level-headed when analyzing this false narrative of Tupac is no different than Drake. Yes, that's what I said. This is what people are saying. And I believe this is a lot of Gen Zers, some old dusty head New York niggas who are still upset about the East Coast, West Coast beef. And yes, some of those Negroes still exist. And people who are just looking for shock value content on the internet. But there is a narrative going around that Drake and Tupac are the same. That Tupac is just as fraud as Drake. So why are you guys slandering Drake? I think a lot of this is coming from the Drake stance too. And even though this should be obvious, especially if you're a hip hop head, apparently it's not. So I have to explain why Tupac and Drake are not the same. Why some people misinterpret Tupac's character, who he was as a person, and why that failed attempt can really muddy the waters on why you should never compare him to Drake. You should never compare him to Drake. I understand people use this one particular clip in 1988 when he was in high school in Baltimore, in the School of Performing Arts, or the Performing Arts School in Baltimore. And they take that interview that he had when he was 17 years old to say, look at this guy. This guy was a ballerina. He was an art student, not some thug. He was acting. He was pretending like he was Bishop and Juice. Look, I get that. I get that. Yeah, in 1988, that's who he was. Or at least that's the clip that we saw. That was a small segment of his life during that time. We don't know how he was throughout his years, throughout his childhood. We don't fully know. We do have glimpses. We do have a bit of understanding of who he was as a person when he was a child. We also have that in Drake. We know who he was as a child. You know, yes, he could have been a mafioso junior through his youth, but we don't have that information. This is the information we have. So let's get into their childhoods first. Since people say that they're the same, let's get into who Tupac was, who Drake was. Now, Tupac was born in East Harlem, New York City. While born, his name was Lassane Parrish Crooks. At age 1, he was renamed Tupac Amari Shakur. He was named after Tupac Amari II, a descendant of the last Incan ruler who was executed in Peru in 1781 after his failed revolt against Spanish rule. Shakur's mother, Afeni Shakur, explained, I wanted him to have the name of a revolutionary indigenous people in the world. I wanted him to know he was a part of a world culture and not just from a neighborhood. Tupac's surname came from Lumumba Shakur, a Sunni Muslim whom his mother married in November 1968. Their marriage fell apart when it was discovered that Lumumba was not Tupac's biological father. All right? Tupac also has Panthers, and we're talking about the Panther movement, the Panther organization, a pro-black, black nationalist organization that was for the people, by the people, that went against the government because the government was against them, because they were enriching and uplifting the black community. That is Pac's roots, and they are very deep. His mother was a part of the Panther 21 criminal trial. Correct? She was also pregnant with Tupac during this trial because she was a very, very important member of the Panther chapter in New York City. Also, Pac's father, his biological father, William Billy Garland, was also an active Black Panther Party member in New York in the late 60s and early 70s. Pac also had other family members who were also involved in the Black Liberation Army. And they were also convicted of serious crimes. Shakur's stepfather, Mutulu Shakur, he spent 4 years on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. Do you understand this? Shakur's godfather, Geronimo Pratt, a high-ranking Black Panther, was convicted of murdering a school teacher during a 1968 robbery. After spending 27 years in prison, his conviction was overturned due to the prosecutions having concealed evidence that proved his innocence. This is who Tupac was. This is where Tupac came from, a family of revolutionaries. Then there's Shakur's godmother, Assata Shakur, who was also a former member of the Black Liberation Army, who was convicted in 1977 of first-degree murder of a New Jersey state trooper. Since 2013, she has been in the FBI's most wanted terrorist list after she escaped prison in 1979. That's Tupac's family background. That's where he comes from, a family of revolutionaries who were convicted of serious crimes. I believe were set up because of who they were, because of how important they were to the Black community in this country. That's where Pac comes from. Drake? Drake? Aubrey Drake Graham was born in 1986 in Toronto, Ontario. His father, Dennis Graham, is an African-American drummer from Memphis who once performed with musician Jerry Lee Lewis. His mother, Sandra Sandy Graham, is a Canadian Ashkenazi Jew who worked as an English teacher and florist. A florist, which is nothing wrong with that, okay? In Drake's youth, he attended a Jewish day school and became a bar mitzvah. Okay, that's what it says on Wikipedia. Drake's parents divorced when he was 5 years old. After the divorce, he and his mother remained in Toronto. His father returned to Memphis on drug-related charges. Graham's limited finances and legal issues caused him to remain in the U.S. into Drake's early adulthood. Prior to his arrest, Graham would travel to Toronto and bring Drake to Memphis every summer, which was, 5 years? So he spent 5 summers in Memphis, which, I mean, I'm just guessing, but in the first 5 years of your life, you don't really have a conscience. You can't remember the first 5 years of your life like that. Okay, cool. Graham, that's Dennis, claimed in an interview that Drake's assertion of him being an absent father were embellishments used to sell music, which Drake vehemently denies. So Drake denies what his father claimed, which was that, Drake is basically saying he was an absent father, which means he doesn't have that much of an attachment to Memphis, right? Drake was raised in 2 neighborhoods. He lived on Weston Road in Toronto's working class West End until grade 6 and attended Weston Memorial Junior Public School until grade 4, playing minor hockey with the Weston Red Wings. Drake was a promising right winger, reaching the Upper Canada College hockey camp, but left at the behest of his mother following a vicious cross-check to his neck during a game by an opposing player. So we see right now, we see that he did have a rough life because he got cross-checked. It was a violent cross-check in hockey. And his mother said, no, Aubrey, you're not gonna play hockey anymore because you got cross-checked in the neck. After that, he moved to one of the city's affluent neighborhoods, Forest Hill, in 2000. When asked about the move, Drake replied, "We had a half of a house we could live in. The other people had the top half, we had the bottom half. I lived in the basement, my mom lived on the first floor. It was not big, it was not luxurious, it was what we could afford." At age 10, Drake appeared in a comedic sketch which aired during the 1997 NHL Awards, featuring a riff of Martin Brodeur and Ron Hextall in their record as being the only goalies to have scored multiple goals. Drake attended Forest Hill Collegiate Institute for high school and attended Vaughan Road Academy in Toronto's multicultural Oakwood Vaughan neighborhood. Drake described Vaughan Road Academy as not by any means the easiest school to go to. So far, Drake grew up in Toronto. He, I guess, once lived in a working class, multicultural neighborhood, and also then in an affluent neighborhood. But Hey, he started from the bottom because his family lived on the first floor of this affluent neighborhood, Forest Hill. Tupac came from a family of political individuals who were targeted by the government, which made their life extremely hard. Extremely hard. Extremely hard. You don't understand how targeted the Panthers were, especially coming from the government. You don't understand how targeted they were. You don't understand that these people had to seek asylum in other countries, in prison, all for the right to protect the black community from the oppressive government. That's the world that Tupac comes from. That's not the same. That's just one. That's not the same. Let's talk about the education of Tupac, because this is where it gets muddy. In the 1980s, Shakur's mother found it difficult to find work, and she struggled with drug addiction. Drake's mother was a florist and an educator. Tupac's mom was an activist, and she later became a drug addict. It's the same, though. I understand it's the same. In 1984, his family moved from New York City to Baltimore, Maryland. Beginning in 1984, when Shakur was 13, he lived in the Penn Lucy neighborhood with his mother and young sister. The home was a 2-story row house that has been subdivided into 2 separate rental units. The Shakur family lived on the first floor. So they were renting in this very humble home in Baltimore in the 80s at the height of the drug epidemic, the crack epidemic in Baltimore. While living in Baltimore, Shakur attended 8th grade at Roland Park Middle School. Now, I want y'all to see this picture. Roland Park Middle School, because people like to say, well, when he was in Baltimore, he went to art school. Pac grew up in a rough neighborhood in Baltimore. He went to school in Roland Park Middle School, which was predominantly black. Then he attended Paul Laurence Dunbar High School. He later transferred to the Baltimore School for the Arts in the 10th grade. Pac and Drake are 2 different individuals that come from 2 different worlds. Pac used the thug image to try to appeal to an audience that he felt was necessary in order to create a more sustainable black community, to sustain a more progressive black America. He was trying to reach that youth that wouldn't understand who he was if he just spoke like Malcolm X, if he spoke like Martin Luther King. Because of his background, because of where he came from. He comes from, again, a revolutionary background. The basis, the heart of Pac is not a gangster, it's not a thug, it's not a ballet dancer. It's a revolutionary, it's a rebel, because that's where his roots come from. And when you are a militant child, when you are a child of the revolution, you have a much harder childhood, a much harder life than those that come from gang backgrounds, that come from a family full of Crips, Bloods, GDs, Vice Lords, whatever. And that's the goddamn truth. Because ain't nothing more harder, ain't nothing more quote unquote gangster than being targeted by the FBI, than being targeted by the government. That's a whole nother level. That's a whole nother level of hardship that a lot of black people would not be able to handle. They would not be able to handle a revolutionary childhood. Pac withstood that. And this is what people need to understand. When you are a child of the revolution, or when you're just in a revolutionary organization, period, your main objective is to be for the betterment of your people. And you have to be able to speak to your people on every kind of level. So if you're in a room full of intellectuals, you need to know how to speak to intellectuals. You have to talk like intellectuals. You have to walk like intellectuals. And when you are on a block, when you are in those hoods, you got to learn how to talk to those people like you are one of them. You got to be able to talk and walk like a drug dealer. You don't have to do what a drug dealer does, but you got to talk their lingo. You got to talk their slang. If you understand 5% Nation, let's just say 5%ers, for example. The founder, Clarence, knew how to talk intellectually, but also talk to the street guys. talk on their level. This is something that is practiced, not because we're pretending to be something that we're not, but you got to understand the duality, especially amongst black people living in this country, because we're not that much far off. We're not that much different from one another. You know, class doesn't really separate black people in the way it does other groups of people, because you can be an affluent member, you can be in middle class, you can be lower income and still live within the same community. You can still face the same level of oppression because of the color of our skin, right? Pac represented that. Drake didn't. Drake didn't know that world. Drake had no clue of that world. And this is what people get messed up about Pac. People believe that for majority of Pac's childhood, he was a ballerina. He was an art student. Then he got the role of Bishop in Juice, and then he changed it to this thug persona. Bishop wasn't even a gangster. Bishop was a rebellious teenager that came from a dysfunctional family. He wasn't some gangbanger. He wasn't repping no set. He wasn't claiming thug life. He wasn't the one gang member amongst the crew. He was a rebellious teenager. That's the character that he played. And Pac resonated with this character. Whether you think he was faking the rebellious caricature or not. I'm not saying everything that Pac did was right and just, but at the same time, I think he's more complicated and layered than people give him credit for. And to compare Pac to Drake, all because you didn't know his revolutionary background, which is the heart of Pac, not the ballet dancer, not the thug, which thug stood for the hate you give. The hate you give. He was always trying to find meaning in something to resonate with the haves and the have-nots. And here's another tidbit of why these two individuals are not the same. Pac died when he was 25. Drake is in his 30s. Drake started discovering the mob ties caricature in his 30s. Pac was in his early 20s. He was in his early 20s when he was going through his ups and downs, when he was trying to find his comfort spot, find who he was as an individual, which we all tend to do when we're in our early 20s and late teens. I know this won't stop the Pac slander, but I just had to say something. If you still walk away from this video saying that Tupac and Drake is the same, then may 1,000 cocks blind you in your motherfucking eye. Pause. With that said, don't forget to like and subscribe. And hey, thank you for listening. Holla.